Hello, this is Psychology A-Level, and this is the first year of the course Social Psychology, and in this video we're going to look at an evaluation for Zimbardo. Right, we're going to concentrate on two main issues, validity and ethics. In terms of validity, if you remember, internal validity means, does the study measure what it's supposed to measure? Are we actually measuring the correct thing? And here the key question is, were the participants role-playing or not? Were they actually conforming to their social roles, like they would if they were really in a prison, or were they just playing along because they knew they were in an experiment? And if they were just playing along, then that means that the study's not actually measuring what it claims to measure, conformity to social roles. So that's the big question. So what's the evidence for and against that? So first of all, 90% of conversations were about prison life, so that suggests they're not like chatting about stuff back home. That suggests they're into their roles, that they're fairly deeply submerged in what they're doing. The other thing that supports the idea that they're really conforming to their social roles is the reactions of some of the prisoners. The fact that they're crying uncontrollably, that they're under severe stress, that they're coming out in rashes and so on. That suggests that they really are conforming to the social role and not just role-playing for a bit of a laugh. On the other hand, they do know they're in an unrealistic prison situation. It's unrealistic because there's no real threat of violence, and they know that. In a real prison, there would be a realistic threat of violence. So, that is the argument on the one hand. But the evidence, on the other hand, is fairly persuasive, isn't it? The 90% of the reactions of the prisoners. If we think as well about his methodology, we could also argue in that it's got quite good internal validity. So if you think about his control of variables, he's done things like randomly allocated the participants to the role of prisoner or guard. So there's lots of things he's done really well, which means we can be really quite confident that the study does have good internal validity. In terms of real life implications, and this is moving away from validity now, but it's a really important, helpful topic that can have positive implications for people really in the world. So if you think about the design of prisons, if there's something within the design of prisons that is causing prison guards to be brutal and to commit horrendous abuses of power, like there have been in the past, then that's really important for us to know. So this study has real life implications because it means we could redesign prisons in some way in order to prevent those sorts of abuses of power. So those were strengths, really. Weaknesses, then. One of the key problems here, the key questions, is, does it really prove that it's situational, that conformity to social roles is due to the situation, or that the abuse of power and these sorts of actions are situational rather than being brutal because it's in their personality? So the question is, are the conclusions biased or overstated? So if you think about Zimbardo's conclusion, he's saying it's the power of the situation that's causing this conformity to social roles. But you could argue, actually, that because only 1/3 of the guards were brutal, that conclusion isn't quite accurate. Equally at the start, there was a prisoner rebellion before it was quashed. So it's not just a simple case of the guards were brutal and the prisoners were weeping. It was more nuanced than that. And so various people have criticised Zimbardo for basically making a biased conclusion. Another problem is that Zimbardo actually played the prison superintendent, so he wasn't an objective observer of the process. Actually, he was involved. He was within the simulation, actually, talking to the guards about what they were doing. So and like refusing requests for the prisoners to be let out and things like that. And so actually you could argue that Zimbardo, he's been quite heavily criticised for that he might have been manipulating the guards in some way, not necessarily consciously, but, you know, subconsciously manipulating them to act in a certain way. So yeah, researcher bias, unwanted effect of the researcher on the study, could definitely be in play here. Another problem is that in 2006, the study was replicated by the BBC. And they filmed it all and showed it on the TV. But actually what happened was that the absolute opposite thing happened. The guards were really weak. They really struggled to keep control, and the prisoners ended up taking over. So that suggests, actually, again, that Zimbardo's conclusions may not be correct. If you have the study being replicated and the exact opposite finding, you really should have some questions about the original study. Why did it find what it found? Was it the fact that Zimbardo was playing the warden? Who knows? But, you know, questions and criticisms that are probably quite valid there. Right, let's talk about ethics in this study. So, I'll just talk through these quite briefly because, I mean, I hope they're fairly apparent to you from having looked at the study itself. But firstly, protection from harm. You've got stuff like the sorts of things that prisoners are being asked to do, being degrading. Their outfits are pretty degrading, aren't they? And embarrassing. You've got stuff like the level of stress that they've been subjected to, sleep deprivation, the uncontrollable crying and so on. So hopefully that one's fairly apparent. Lack of informed consent. They did sign a consent form, but they possibly would have taken it to mean something else than what actually happened. So they were told that some basic civil liberties would be taken away as part of the experiment, but perhaps they wouldn't have expected it to go as far as it did. Deception, it was another issue because they weren't told they were going to be arrested at home. That could potentially cause quite a lot of embarrassment if people who live near them see them being arrested and think they're really being arrested. You know, that is deception. Not telling them that that's going to happen. Confidentiality. The whole thing has been filmed, as you've seen. There's clips online of the original experiment. So the question we've always got to ask here is the cost, the human cost here, the stress that's been suffered by the prisoners and so on, is that really worth the knowledge that was gained from this experiment? I mean, potentially very valuable knowledge, isn't it? To understand what about a prison situation might be causing these sorts of abusive guards. However, if you can then criticise the conclusions for various reasons, or say they've been overstated and so on, have we really gained something that is worth that human cost? And I don't have an answer to that. That's something that you can reflect on. So in answer, I mean, this is what Zimbardo would say in answer to this and how he would defend his experiment. Things like the study was approved beforehand. The arrests were the only deception, and they did sign consent forms, and there was extensive debriefing. He stopped the experiment early. So you can see, hopefully there, that Zimbardo has taken steps. He's followed the ethical guidelines of the time. And he's tried to take steps to make the experiment more ethical. However, again, I'm going to leave you with that question, really. Was the information gained worth the human cost? And you can have a think about that.